As a member of the Lincoln College Board, I'd like to thank the panelists. This, I think, far exceeded our expectations. It's really a wonderful presentation. And also thank the Civil Rights Commission for joining us. This was really a wonderful, wonderful event. Dr. Morrill, I think we channel our inner Lincoln. I can tell you that he's smiling at your remarks. Made him very happy. But I have a question of curiosity for Dr. Crew. The perspective you brought was really interesting, and I was wondering if groups of African Americans thought of a biblical solution and decided to get out of Dodge and do like Moses, large groups of them resettle somewhere. Did any of that occur?
Are you talking about before the Civil War or after?
No, after. You were talking about the reaction to emancipation.
Right.
And I was wondering if there were any people who had the reaction to emancipation that said, gee, let's just get out of here. Let's all get together. There's a lot of country they could have gone to. Were there any such movements?
Yeah, well, we just mentioned the Exodus years. 1879, you have a large number of African Americans, led by Pat Singleton and others, who decide that what they're experiencing after the Civil War and after Reconstruction is disappointing, and that their ability to have any kind of control of their own lives is limited when they're living in places like Kentucky, Mississippi, and other places. And they go essentially across the Mississippi to places like Oklahoma and Kansas, where they create new towns, black towns. And Demas is one, Allentown in California is another one. There are others that emerged during this period that become sort of black enclaves. You also have out west sort of black communities that emerge as well. Houston has a black community that emerges. Fort Worth in Kansas has black town that emerges there. So that there are efforts by African Americans to create spaces that they can try to control themselves. In fact, that also takes place in the South. Davis Bend is a town that emerges during this period. Becomes what's the name of Davis Bend? Mound Bayou becomes Mound Bayou, Mississippi, and that is an all-black town in the middle of Mississippi, where a slaveholder is willing to sell land to a group of African Americans to create their own town in the space of Mississippi. Edenstown, Florida is the same way in the 1890s. That it's the first black incorporated town in the nation in Florida. So you do have efforts by African Americans to create spaces that they can control and maybe shield themselves from the bubble away from the difficulties they're facing in the larger society.
Spencer, why didn't the Homestead Act take? Was it not being marketed to the newly freed African Americans, or? Well, you'd think that, I mean, here's two big signature things.
There are black homesteaders who go out. I think sometimes we also tend to over-credit the Homestead Act, because if you look at it closely, more than half the people who take advantage of it lose the land.
Right.
So it's not really a place, a way in which people become successful as farmers. The farms that are successful in the long run are big ones, not the smaller ones. So I think part of it is also to be successful in the homestead, you need to have some capital. Even though you get the land for free at the beginning, you've got to be able to improve it. You've got to be able to get credits from banks, to get seeds, to do the planting and everything else. So it is not an inexpensive process. And I think that's also one of the things that's discouraging.
Another factor, too, is a social one. That is, the institutions and the freed people had lived with and were most familiar with were institutions in the South, their churches, their organizations, freedmen's bureau operations. Why should they have to pack up and leave? Why should they have to get out of Dodge? Why should the damn slave owners have to get out? Why not send them to Nevada? It seems to me there would have been a lot better logic that way. But it didn't happen. It didn't happen. But that doesn't mean that the black people feel obligated. That, all right, we're free. Now we have to leave. Wait a minute. No. We built this place too. So we're going to stay here. And we're going to try and make the best of it and tough it out because our families are here. One of the curiosities immediately at the end of the war is the mobility of freed people. They're mobile not only because they want to get away from the white people that they've had to work for, they're also trying to track down relatives who have been years before sold away from them. and they're trying to find and reconstitute families. So there's a social tether that will keep many people from departing for parts unknown, simply because this is their neighborhood, this is their place, this is their hill, this is their gulch, and they're going to stay there.
I have a question about slavery today. I would say that there are far more women throughout the world suffering some form of slavery today than the total number of slaves in America during the time of the Civil War. Bride burning, women are sold, raped, stoned to death, 15-year-old girls are shot in the head when they want to speak out. Why aren't we as a nation more outraged by this? Why isn't this at the forefront of our civil rights movements or diplomatic moments? Why is this happening? Why isn't this a primary issue to the American government, the American people? What can we do about it? Diplomatically, can we say, you mistreat women, our aid to your country is zero? Is it we're afraid to criticize other cultures and religions that may be more likely to enslave women or treat them as slaves? Why don't we care more, and what more can we do about it?
Well, one reason is for many Americans, we think slavery is something that ended 150 years ago. And this is, it goes back to rename. You've got to rename slavery as human trafficking to make it sound like it's something that's up to date in current events. Because we say, well, this is the office about slavery. Well, we got rid of that 150 years ago. No, we didn't. There is still an American anti-slavery society. And there needs to be. Why don't we confront trafficking on these levels? Well, for one thing, it's way far away. That's another thing. It's out of sight, out of mind. And also because it might be diplomatically expensive to make a commitment that way.
I think that I will slipstream that answer because it was perfect. You know, the reality is that the Congress appropriates about $25 million for us to fight slavery worldwide through programs. $25 million is when we go and tell to our budget folks, they have to look at their columns, which are set up for the billions, and then kind of move over and see whether or not the budget dust is on the page. And I think that it's something that, you know, we have responded to that in my office, whether it's under the Bush administration or under the Obama administration, by making every one of those dollars go 4 or 5 times as far through innovative programming and everything else. But the reality is, until the outside groups, until the American public insists that a different level of appropriations happen, then there will be that same problem. I think that what we see is that the euphemisms are starting to fall off now, and people on the Hill are starting to care more and more. But I think that the silos that we try to break down through the interagency process to get Health and Human Services working with Justice Department, working with the folks at the State Department, et cetera, those silos are alive and well and living in the Congress as far as the different committees of jurisdiction. And so the folks who are dealing with gender-based violence, the folks that are dealing with women's issue, I tell you, there's not a week that goes by without an article on modern slavery in the New York Times, and only about every 4th week will they actually call it slavery or human trafficking. They'll talk about a series of tragic fires in garment factories where people are being locked in, and they won't then say being locked into your garment factory is a form of modern slavery. They'll talk about bride selling. They'll talk about all of these things, and yet those silos, whether it's within our institutions in Washington or within our society, continue to be so dominant that we haven't been able to get out from under them. We're showing some progress on the notion of child prostitution and the idea that a child prostitute is a victim of the pimp rather than a co-conspirator of the pimp. There was a case in the 1920s about that when the Mann Act first came out, as far as whether or not a woman who's enslaved by a pimp is his co-conspirator or his victim. And so, I think that it's just a matter of having civil society engaged and insisting that all of our institutions see this and name it and respond to it. For those of you who are coming this from a historical standpoint, there is such an organization, Historians Against Slavery, that is something that I know about 200 or 300 historians around the country, some of whom study antebellum slavery, some of whom do women's or labor issues, are all starting to come together. There was something up at the Gilder Lehrman Center up at Yale on this recently. It's the first time I think that they've looked at modern slavery within their, as being within their mission. And I think that that's really takes us to the next level. Otherwise, we start to get into a little bit of a navel gazing. How often can we read the same antebellum texts in a new way? I think the newest way is to take those antebellum texts and breathe light in them by what's happening now. We owe it to the people that lived through it the first time.